So maybe you've heard about games like Dungeons and Dragons or Starfinder or Call of Cthulhu, and you're interested in trying out role-playing games for yourself, but you don't know where to begin. Well, today we have some advice for you on this episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Mark and I am the Local Disaster Tour Guide. That's right, I am a storyteller and it is my responsibility to welcome you into a world of fantasy and imagination, of danger and suspense. And be warned, if you see me smiling, it's already too late. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to my channel where we talk about role-playing games and just the many different facets of this fascinating hobby. Today, this video is actually directed towards brand new players who are interested in role-playing as a hobby, but don't necessarily know where to begin. This was a requested topic that was sent to me because role-playing as a hobby is such a diverse field that it can be hard to figure out exactly where you should start if you are interested in playing some of these games. So join me as I share a little bit of my story and offer some tips for you on where you can begin so that you can experience the joy of these games as well. So the first thing I'd like to do today is share a little bit about my story as a gamer. Now, I realize story time may not be the most appealing thing to everybody, so if you are interested in just hearing the tips themselves, I'll try to throw a timestamp up in the video and you can just skip ahead to that portion. But I've actually been role-playing now for a little over 25 years. This has been a major part of my life, and it is a hobby that has really influenced me as a person, and I have seen a lot of things in this hobby throughout my decades of play. So I'd just like to share my story a little bit so you know where I'm coming from, and maybe it'll give you some insight for you as you get started with this hobby as well. So my very first role-playing game, I didn't even know to call it a role-playing game. When I started playing role-playing games, they were definitely a much more niche hobby, and I just honestly wasn't aware that role-playing games were even a thing. My very first role-playing game was actually a Star Wars game, and the way it happened is I had a friend by the name of Chris, and back in middle school, we loved Star Wars. And we just really wanted to play characters in the Star Wars universe. We wanted to be part of those stories. And so Chris and I ended up inventing a game where we pretended to be characters in the Star Wars universe. We took the card game Magic the Gathering and absolutely butchered the rules and came up with our own rules so that we could be characters in the Star Wars universe. And we played this homebrew Star Wars role-playing game for several years, just enjoying the stories that we invented together. Well, I got older, and in high school, I landed that first job at McDonald's that so many of us have gone through. And while I was working at McDonald's, I met a man by the name of Scott, and he was a big fan of Star Wars. So in our conversations about Star Wars, it wasn't long before I mentioned the Star Wars game that me and my friend Chris had invented years ago in middle school. And I remember Scott looking at me and going, "You know that's a thing, right?" And Scott was the first person to actually tell me about role-playing games. He threw my nerd worldview wide open with the discovery of Star Wars role-playing games. He actually let me borrow an old West End Star Wars game book. So I went out and discovered that there was this new Star Wars game called Star Wars D20. And this is actually not the first role-playing book that I ever bought. This is the second. I have sadly lost my copy of the original Star Wars D20 rules, but I very quickly dived into this role-playing game, this opportunity to play characters in the Star Wars universe. Now, that phrase, Star Wars D20, the D20 is a reference to a particular rule set that was very popular at the time called the D20 rules. there were a lot of different games that actually used the D20 rules, and it didn't take me long to figure out that if I knew how to play Star Wars, that there were other games that I could play as well. And by far, the most well-known D20 rules game at the time was the 3rd edition of Dungeons & Dragons. So I very quickly made the jump to that system and began storytelling games for Dungeons & Dragons as well. In fact, Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition is the system that to this day I actually own the most materials for. Not only did Wizards of the Coast publish a lot of books for D&D 3.0 and 3.5, but a lot of third-party companies also published books for D&D 3.0 and 3.5 as well. Now, I would like to do a quick tangent and talk about another gaming company that has influenced me a lot as a gamer. The D20 rule system is just one set of rules out there. There are definitely a lot of different styles and types of games that you can play. And one company that really showed me how creative writing can be a part of role-playing is White Wolf Games. This is a copy of the 1st edition rulebook for their Exalted game. Now, I played a lot of different White Wolf games, but I think Exalted is probably my favorite, just because of how over-the-top and action-filled their games are designed to be. But if D20 taught me a lot about the rule system behind games, White Wolf is really the company that showed me how amazing the writing for games like these could be. And so, for the better part of a decade, I played a lot of D20 games and I played a lot of White Wolf games, and they really influenced me as a gamer. Now, if you fast forward a few years, there was a major controversy that kind of shook up the role-playing world about 10 years ago. And that was a game called Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition. Now, I don't want to start an edition war. A lot of people get really passionate about their games and about their favorite systems, and it is not my goal to start one of those fights here. I will just say that I left the Dungeons & Dragons ship when Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition came out. D&D 4e was not a terrible game, but at the time, I really had some problems with how Wizards of the Coast was managing their company and their games. And in that time where I really had some problems with the business model from Wizards of the Coast, there was another company that stepped in, Paizo Publishing. They declared that they were going to continue to run with a system that would be compatible with Dungeons & Dragons 3.5. I was heavily invested in that system, and a compatible game sounded good to me, so I started playing a little game called Pathfinder. This is a copy of the Pathfinder 2nd edition core rulebook that just came out about 8 months ago. When Pathfinder 1st edition came out, I was one of the beta test players for 1st edition, and I definitely enjoyed what I saw in the game then, and me and my group, we quickly made the jump to Pathfinder, and for the last decade, Pathfinder really has been my core game. But I can tell you, of all the games you just saw, that is just a small selection of the games that I have played over the years. I did a count the other day, and I own books for at least 22 different gaming systems. Yes, I've spent way too much money. And I know that I've probably played a dozen more. So there are a lot of games out there, and there are a lot of great games out there beyond even just the few systems I just showed you. So that's just a really quick introduction to my history as a gamer. So with all of that in mind, you can kind of see why role-playing can be a difficult hobby to start just because there are so many options out there. Should I play Pathfinder? Should I play Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition? Should I play Starfinder or Call of Cthulhu? Should I go for a role-playing game set in a universe like Star Wars? Well, to be honest, all of those are good options. There are a lot of different fantastic opportunities in the world of role-playing games right now, and if anything, it's an embarrassment of riches for all of the fantastic games that are out there. So I would like to offer you just a few tips as a new player that you can use to get started in role-playing. My first tip is this: don't buy anything, or at least not yet. There are so many games out right now that if you have no experience with role-playing, it would be very, very difficult to know where to start and what to buy, and there's a very high likelihood that you might invest in something that ultimately doesn't do you much good as a gamer. I love Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and I would highly recommend that game to anybody, but if you're a brand new player, I'm not going to suggest that you start by buying that game. Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition is a very solid addition to the game, and a lot of people really love it, but I'm not going to direct you there either. You see, here's the beautiful thing about role-playing games as a hobby. While there are definitely a lot of great games out there, you actually don't need very much in order to play. For most role-playing games, you actually only need a few things. You need a character sheet, a pencil, and some dice. Most established role-playing groups have plenty of that stuff to spare. As a quick teaser, this is the community dice bucket at my gaming table. If you need dice and you're at our table, I promise you we have some you can use. Those simple tools are all you really need to be able to participate in the game. And so rather than diving in and purchasing a whole bunch of things at the start, I would encourage you to play several games and get a feel for the hobby, and then once you have an idea what you're going to be playing and what you're going to be doing, make purchases based on that first. And another thing I'd like to say on this point, while the game is important, the most important thing in determining whether or not you're going to enjoy role-playing as a hobby is the group that you play with. Finding a good group is far more important than finding a good game. There are some games that, personally, I have real problems with the mechanical structure of the game, and yet I have played several campaigns with groups in those games because the group was just that good. So, if you're getting started in role-playing, save your cash for now and get some experience in role-playing, and once you have an idea what you're going to be playing, use that to guide your initial purchases. The second tip I have for you if you're getting started in role-playing is the best thing you can do is sit in on a few role-playing game sessions before you start playing. The excitement to get involved in a role-playing game, I understand, but sometimes it can be really difficult to know what you're going to want to do or how you're going to want to be involved in a particular game. Here's a quick question. What type of character should I play? Well, that is a really, really complicated question, and it is very easy to end up creating a character you don't enjoy very much because you don't understand how the game works. I once told a game master, I do not play subtle characters. My least favorite class is actually the thief or rogue style character. Now that's just a personal preference. Mechanically, I understand exactly how thief and rogue characters work, and I understand exactly why they are powerful characters to play. I just don't care to play them. When you are first diving into a game, you may sign up for a particular type of character only to discover that that's not really your thing, that's not something that truly appeals to you. So I would like to encourage you, before you play a game, sit in on a game. Watch another gaming group play, watch different types of characters in action for a few sessions, and you will probably begin to discover what kinds of characters appeal to you, and then you can make informed decisions about what kind of character you would like to play. Another pro tip, if you get a chance to sit in on a role-playing game, ask the storyteller if it would be okay for you to control some of the monsters. Maybe a few of the weaker monsters or weaker villains that the party's going to deal with in a gaming session. See if he'll let you control those during the fight scene. That'll give you an idea for how the rules work. And if you make a major mistake, that's okay. The monster's supposed to lose the fight anyways. So the first step in getting oriented to role-playing games is to watch a few role-playing games. Quick aside, what about actual play videos on YouTube or live play podcasts? What about those kinds of things? Those are fantastic. I follow a few shows like that myself, and you can learn a lot from those kinds of shows. But let me just say, there is a real difference from gaming table to gaming table, and what you see on a role-playing show is not necessarily what you're going to encounter at an actual RPG table. So those shows are good things. I definitely recommend checking those out if you're interested. But I really want to encourage you, if you're a new player, find an opportunity to sit down at a gaming table and just observe a game or two. It will help you immensely. So this raises a question. How do I find a game? And how do I find a gaming group? Well, welcome to one of the biggest challenges in role-playing. Even experienced gamers can struggle to find a gaming group to play with, and really, networking among gamers is going to be a challenge for everyone. But there are a few options that you have. First off, local gaming stores and local hobby stores. You may see the term "find local gaming store" on forums around the internet. That just references hobby stores in your area where games are sold and quite often where games are run. You can go to these stores and they will frequently have open game nights where you can try a particular game, or open gaming tables where you might be able to sit down and watch a session. They often have advertisements for groups that are looking for new players. A local hobby store is a fantastic place to search out and to network for gaming groups. Also, quick aside, support your fine local gaming store. They are a pillar of the community. If you don't have a hobby store in your area, another thing you can consider is online forums. If there is a game that you are particularly interested in, such as Dungeons & Dragons or Starfinder, go to the forums for that specific game and look for resources that can put you in touch with gamers in your area. I have actually met some gamers from my home state through online forums, and if you don't have a local hobby store that you can use to network, that can be an excellent way to make connections to help you find a group. Still, there's a very real possibility that there might not be a big gaming community in your area, at least not yet. And if that's the case, what you may need to do is what I had to do when I was getting into gaming, and that's build your own gaming group. Here's the reality. People with similar interests often hang out together. And if you're the kind of person who thinks that role-playing games sound particularly interesting, the reality is you probably have some friends in your circle who would be interested in those kinds of games as well. So even if there is not a good networking opportunity in your area, you can still try to build your own gaming group. Now, building a gaming group can be a little bit difficult, especially if you and your friends have never played before. I would recommend easing into playing role-playing games. Don't dive full on in just from the start. But there are a few things that you can do to kind of step your way into this particular hobby. Step one for building your own gaming group is board games. Just like role-playing games are seeing an explosion of popularity, board games are seeing an explosion of popularity as well. And board games is a good activity that you and your friends can do together to really get a feel for if you enjoy playing together. And I would like specifically to recommend cooperative board games. Real quick, this is Shadowrun Crossfire. This is my wife and I's favorite cooperative board game. In that particular game, you play mercenaries who are getting paid to go on secret missions, and you have to work together to accomplish different objectives. And that game actually has a lot of elements that you also find in RPGs, where in between missions your characters level up and get stronger and learn new abilities. Cooperative board games are a fantastic stepping stone into role-playing games because you're learning how to work together as a group. There's often an excellent story element to those games. And if it's not working out for your group, it's easy to kind of disband and pull in new players to find a group that you enjoy gaming with. So a good first step in building your own group is to have a board game night and play some cooperative board games together. A good second step in building your own gaming group are beginner boxes. A lot of different role-playing games have beginner boxes that offer a simplified version of the game that you're interested in playing. So if there's a particular RPG that you and your group want to try, see if they have a beginner box that you can play. Beginner boxes typically come with pre-made characters or partially made characters, so it's very easy for you to get a character and try out different characters. They often have some basic adventures that you can run through very quickly, and it's just a simplified, streamlined version of the rules, and it is a really, really excellent way to get a feel for a game without investing too heavily in a game. Now, sadly, I can't show you any beginner boxes because I don't have any. They weren't a thing when I started playing. That being said, I'm very glad that gaming companies have started doing this. I know that Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition has several beginner boxes that you can try. Starfinder has an excellent beginner box that I've seen a lot of positive reviews on. And Pathfinder 2nd edition, my game of choice, they're planning on releasing their beginner box this October. And a lot of other game systems out there have beginner boxes as well. So if you see a game that you and your friends are interested in, that is often a fantastic first purchase to see if that's really the right game for you and your friends to be playing. So my last tip for getting started with role-playing games is this. Now that you've got a group to play with, now is the time where you can begin investing intelligently in the hobby. Gamers are famous for being impulse shoppers, and if you're anything like me, you'll probably spend way too much on the hobby. But you want your first purchases to correspond to the games that you're actually going to be playing, because you want those purchases to enhance the games that you're going to be playing. So I strongly encourage save the shopping for once you've gotten a little bit more involved in the hobby, because you'll have a better idea of what's going to be useful to you as a player and what's going to be less impactful on the game that your group is actually playing. But those are just a few quick tips that can help you get started in RPGs. And with any luck, hopefully soon you'll be telling some legendary stories with your friends. Okay, so let's summarize what we've talked about today. If you're a new player and you want to get started in role-playing games, my first tip is don't buy anything, at least not yet. You don't need a lot of money or a lot of materials to participate in role-playing games, and often the materials that you need, an experienced group will have an excess of those materials that they can share with you. So save your money at the start and wait until you have a little more experience as a gamer before you start making purchases, because that will help you make purchases that are going to be beneficial to the games you're actually playing. My second tip is, before you play a game, sit in on a game. Watch some people actually play the game and get an idea for the flow of the game and for the mechanics of the game. If the storyteller will let you, see if you can control some monsters during the fight scene, and that'll give you some experience with the mechanics without being locked into a particular character type. Watching a game will help you understand what parts of the game you really enjoy, and that will help you build a better character when you actually start playing. For my third tip, we talked about networking. We said that one of the biggest challenges in role-playing can be finding a good group to play with. We talked about the fine local gaming store, local hobby stores that sell the games and often run some games. That is an excellent place to go if you want to observe a game or if you want to try to get in touch with some people to build your own gaming group. We also talked about using online forums as a resource, going to the gaming companies and going to their forums and seeing if you can connect to other people who play the games that you're interested in. For our fourth tip, we talked about what to do if your networking is unsuccessful. If there's not a gaming group in your area, you may need to build your own gaming group. We talked about identifying other friends that you have that might be interested in role-playing games as well, and we talked about how you can bring them together to build your own group. We talked about using board game nights, and especially cooperative board games, as a way of getting a feel for gaming with one another to see if your group is a good match for playing an RPG. We also talked about beginner boxes that a lot of gaming companies offer that give you a simplified and streamlined version of the game so that you can try out the game without having a huge investment in the game. If you follow all of these steps, then you're ready to begin investing in the different accessories associated with the hobby. But let me throw this conversation out to you all. If you're an experienced gamer, what tips do you have for new players who are just getting started in the hobby? How would you suggest that they get started? Also, if you're a new player and you've got questions that I didn't talk about in this video, leave your comments down below and I'll try to get to those in a future video. Finally, do the other YouTube stuff. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, share the video even. But let's keep this conversation about this fantastic hobby going. I hope that your first game is a critical success. Have a great day. Hello everyone, this is Mark, and this is the post-credits volunteer shout-out. I like to take a little bit of time with every video to talk about volunteerism. At my real-world job, I work as a chaplain and volunteer coordinator, so I see the actual impact of volunteers every day at my job. I want to encourage you, if there is an organization that you love or if there is a cause that you are passionate about, take some time to volunteer for those things and make a difference in your community. If you've never volunteered before, you may be asking, what is the benefit to me in volunteering? Well, there's actually several positives for volunteers, and I want to use this time and some of my time in future videos to talk about the benefits to the volunteer themselves. And in a tie-in to our conversation from earlier today, I want to talk about networking. Volunteerism is one of the best ways that you can build a social network in your life. At the organization I work for, we have a number of speech therapists and occupational therapists and physical therapists who are part of our mission in our community. And as a result, I have seen a lot of high school students and college students who are interested in those specific career paths come to us and say, hey, can we volunteer with you? We want to get some experience in your world so that we know what this is really like. If there's a particular career path that you're interested in, look for volunteer opportunities associated with that career path, and that can be a fantastic way of both understanding what the job is really like and building connections for walking that career path in your future. Additionally, if there is a social group or a particular cause that you are very passionate about, volunteerism is one of the best ways to build those connections and be a part of that movement. So, if you're interested in volunteerism, if you have something you are passionate about, I just want to encourage you, look for opportunities to volunteer because that's going to build a network that will help you change your community and change your world. Have a fantastic day.